I want to ask in general about your success as an investor. So you obviously, we talked a little bit about these companies you built and you did really well at them, but I think you're probably most famous these days is for someone who's invested in, I think maybe dozens of unicorns. You've backed some really top companies from the beginning. You mentioned Stripe earlier. I think one of the famous ones. You kind of invested in them really early on and had been a mentor to those guys. Like how did you find guys like that? How are you able to keep winning again and again and again with these early stage investments?
Yeah, I think I've been super lucky on that stuff. I think a lot of the companies that I got involved with quite early was just because I was helping out people in the ecosystem. Like I was starting a company myself, and people just started coming to me either for advice, or I was a couple months ahead of them, or we would help each other.
You just happened to help the really talented ones, huh?
Yeah, just fell into it, So I just fell into I'm the clown car in the gold mine or whatever.
No, I don't think that's the right analogy.
But I got very lucky. So I helped out a lot of these early teams, and they just happen to be some of the biggest companies. It's Airbnb, it's Stripe. Eventually I ended up helping out Coinbase and Figma and Instacart and all. And it's been a great ride.
Like, what is it about teams, for example, like Stripe, that to differentiate them from others? Like, what about what guys running that company made them special?
Yeah, I've been kind of noodling on this. I had a conversation with some folks on my team yesterday, where I was just trying to brainstorm on what are there specific signs of truly outsized successful outcomes in terms of the types of founders. And I think a lot of it is just like, do you end up in the right product market? Is the market big enough? Is it growing? Is it dynamic in the right way? And so I think half of it is just you find the right market, and some of that could be luck and some of that couldn't.
But those guys are like, I mean, obviously I know you agree they're special, but they seem like they're like some of the leading kind of intellectuals in our world right now.
No matter what, you need the market, right?
Yeah.
Now within that, there's tons and tons of people who enter these markets and do horribly, right? Yeah. And so what's different? And so I almost view it as there being three types of founders that become hyper successful. And I'm just testing this out or spitballing it, right? I don't know if this is correct. The first one is kind of the polymathic, hyper intellectual, yet very competitive person. And that's probably Patrick and John from Stripe. Honestly, that was Larry and Sergey when I worked at Google. They were very polymathic, very deep on everything. They'd go down into the weeds on the data.
Yep.
And so I think one almost like super founder archetype is that. Yep. I think the second one is the super hardcore, extremely focused, really, really driven overdrive founder. That may be, Travis from Uber.
That reminds me of like Peter at Wish back in the day, but when he was doing well.
Yeah, Peter was just super focused. And I think there's almost signals of those, because a lot of people in our ecosystem now, for example, are doing angel investing, or they're involved with lots of other companies while they're running their company. And that second class of founders don't do any of that. They're just, they actually say no to everything, and they're just all in on one thing in a really
Travis
big way.
is definitely that way,
Yeah, so I think that's another archetype. And there's a few people I can think of who just had massive success that I just view as incredibly focused, right?
I feel like Elon used to be more that way, because he really would say no to everything.
Yeah, some of the best founders are just, like Parker at Rippling is incredibly judicious with his time. And he's just like, he's really focused. And then I think there's a third type of founder, which is just like the network effect business. And it's just, you have something that has network effects, you're going to do well.
Even if you're a clown car.
You could be, you could be Zuck, and then you take it to the next level,
That's
right?
fair.
And you start doing things like Llama and things like that.
So Zuck maybe has a network effect plus maybe some of the polymath side or something like that.
Yeah, or just, I don't know him, so I don't know if he's on the intense focus or the polymathic side or whatever, but I'm just saying like, maybe he's sort of an overlapping archetype of like one of those things, plus you now have a network effect business, so it's a default defensible.
Have you seen a lot of more network effect businesses recently? Because network effect is a thing we always talked about a lot in consumer, obviously, and those are giant companies in our world, and there's some in enterprise. But what are you seeing in network effects these days that are exciting?
Yeah, I'm seeing less network effects and more scale effects, which are related or overlapping, where as you get more scale, you end up with cost advantages that then allow you to get more scale. You could argue maybe Stripe is in that basket, but there's also more modern versions of that, particularly in energy and other related markets. So it's back to a broader question of how do you create defensibility in a business? And there's almost like 5 or 6 common patterns of defensibility. Scale effects is one, network effects is another. Creating an ecosystem on top of your platform, like what Salesforce has done, is one.
Yep.
There may be long-term contracts and durability of those contracts, which happens, for example, in the medical distribution world. So, there's in the world of business, there's like 5 ways or 6 ways to create defensibility, and roughly everything falls into those. Yeah,
at Palantir, we always try to create network effects, and we did get a few of them going. So we got a lot of countries working over it with dozens of countries. We kind of had to be on it. I think we were really proud to sell to Israel, and it was a big deal that they bought it, because I never buy anything from anyone, but I think it was probably that network effect that, I'd like to think we're just good enough, but I think that kind of helps, and then we had like Airbus using it with all of its suppliers, and everyone had to be on it. So I think there are enterprise network effects you can do, but they do seem to be more rare these days.
Yeah, I think so. And then there's also just the scale effects we mentioned. Like I know we were both involved with Andrew really early, and that's a good example where they now have such a broad portfolio of products. They have the deep customer relationships, and that allows a flywheel in terms of the ability to continue to cross-sell different types of products.
I think you get big enough too that you get a reputation in DC, and you can like do things in DC. You know what's crazy on Anduril one? So we have this company, Saronic. I think you're also just invested in that I help build, and it's growing really fast for the Navy. And they asked us to weaponize some of the autonomous vessels, and so we reached out to a few different primes. And Anduril was so good that like within 3 days, like literally 3 days, we got the NDA signed with all the models, all the data, exactly how it works, sent it back to the Navy. And it was like it took multiple weeks even to get the NDA signed with like the other guys. And so it's kind of cool because the Anduril is now this thing that you can use as a prime. It's then making it grow even faster because everyone wants to work with it because it's the best.
Yeah, no, you'd have, and that is one of those sort of feedback loops that's very positive for some of these businesses. And so I think everybody always underestimates the degree to which these feedback loops end up mattering and the way that it changes the velocity and trajectory of a business. And if you end up on a positive track, it keeps going. And that's also true for hiring, right? There's certain networks that you tap into that keep the flywheel going. Somebody on my team actually went back and asked, are there common schools that all the founders of the biggest companies went to over the last decade, for example?
Interesting,
right? And there's basically 3 schools that are like a huge chunk of the overall value created. And then there's maybe 5 more, and that's very dispersed.
What are the schools?
It's kind of what you'd expect, at least for entrepreneurship. It's Stanford, it's MIT, it's Harvard. And then there's sort of the next set, which is like Duke, it's Carnegie Mellon, it's a handful of places.
Did Berkeley make it?
Berkeley's on there particularly for AI and blockchain.
I'm Stanford, but it's my rival school, so I'm curious.
Berkeley, actually, it's really interesting. Berkeley has a lot of PhDs in AI who've started interesting companies.
I actually have hired quite a few PhDs in AI from Berkeley.
They're very good. And Databricks, so all the data, AI, et cetera, is like basically PhDs from Berkeley. And so there are these weird clusters or pockets of talent that go on to do interesting things. And that's actually been true throughout history, right? You go back and you look at the Renaissance, or you look at Paris in the late 1800s.
The groups from some small town in Hungary will have like 10 of the most important mathematicians. It's crazy how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true for art movements. That's true for literary movements, and it's true for technology movements.